Hello, listeners. From the RSNA, this is the Radiology Cardiothoracic Imaging Journal podcast. I am your host, Praveen Ranganath, and I am a radiologist from Dallas, Texas. In this podcast, we explore research advances and technical developments in cardiothoracic imaging through conversations with our authors, our editors, and experts in the field. Enjoy! All right, listeners, today we will be diving into the increasingly vital role of social media in science communication and professional profile building in cardiothoracic imaging. As many of you may know, these platforms offer very unique opportunities for us as imagers to share research, to engage audiences, and to network with others out there in a much more dynamic way than the structured methods of the past with just papers or job fora. Today, to share his expertise on the topic, I am joined by a friend and colleague, Dr. Francisco Caiche. Francisco, thank you so much for coming on to the podcast. Welcome, welcome.
Thank you, Praveen. It's great to be here to share my experience on this very exciting topic.
Yes, of course. Thanks again. You are well known in the social media space in cardiothoracic imaging. But before we get into that, let's start by talking about you yourself, as well as your current role in the cardiothoracic imaging social media community, and connect the dots for us, perhaps even bringing in a little bit of your history in radiology and imaging.
Of course, thank you. I am a cardiothoracic radiologist, just finished a fellowship at the University of Ottawa, and I've been involved in social media and multiple platforms associated to the RSNA, first in radiographics, and now for a couple of years in radiology cardiothoracic imaging. I served last year as the social media leader for our journal, Radiology Cardiothoracic Imaging, early career editorial board. And for the incoming year, I will move on to co-lead with two amazing colleagues. My role essentially involves coordinating and designing the strategy for our social media presence, which focuses on three main types of content that highlight publications from our journal. We have posts promoting images in publications that showcase striking or educational cardiothoracic imaging cases. We have in-a-minute posts, which are well known across the RSNA journal suites. These are very short, engaging summaries of original research. And then we have tutorials, which are structured with more longer threads explaining original research with a little bit more depth.
Yeah, fantastic. Kudos to being able to put all this together, and congratulations on the upcoming co-leadership position. Super, super cool. I'm sure many of our listeners out there have seen, if not one, all of these images in publication, in a minute tweets, as well as the tutorials, which have been really impactful in expanding the audience for the publications that are in the journal. Of course, the primary literature is key, but getting it out there through now super modern and super commonly used fora across particularly our younger generation of listeners and our younger generation of scientists has been awesome to see. For you, over this past year in this role, could you talk about your biggest takeaways, the biggest impacts that you've had on your life?
Of course. So one of the biggest lessons that I've had throughout this year is that consistency and timing are key. All of the social media efforts that we do in cardiothoracic imaging, they need a sustained commitment. That translates to posting regularly, following up on content, engaging with the audience, like engaging in conversations with your colleagues, and also monitoring how people interact with it. That means staying tuned to see how many times it was liked or shared. Also, a very important one is that these posts may look quick and easy because they are short, visual, and super engaging, but they do take real time and effort to produce. In terms of making them happen, everyone has been actively engaged in creating them. Another important lesson is that each platform is different, not only in content style, but also in regional preferences. So initially, we focused heavily on Twitter or X, which is very strong globally, but mainly in the Americas. By the half of the year or something like that, we had Ling Yi, one of our colleagues from the editorial board from China. She made us aware of the importance of WeChat in her region, and she started sharing a lot of content from our journal there. And then we also have European colleagues in our boards and in our meetings. So they have highlighted how LinkedIn is more widely used there. So that's something that we all have to be aware of. And then in terms of content style, as we know, all of these platforms are different. Twitter works for concise posts with strong visuals and targeted hashtags. LinkedIn is a little bit more professional, more structured posts that highlight the significance of the works. And then there's other platforms like Instagram, which thrive on high quality images or short videos. And then YouTube, which allows deeper and structured explanations. So all of these differences, they have to be taken in mind when one is deciding how we're going to use social media.
Yeah, I love that description of the diversity of platforms and how each one is unique in terms of how they contact the listeners, not just in terms of the content, but just where we are. I'm based out of the Americas. I tend, you're right, to be erring towards Twitter and X for my, we'll call it semi professional content, things related to my career, but I'm digesting them in a non traditional form. However, this is clearly different than our European colleagues, our Asian colleagues, those in Africa and Australia, where different media may thrive there. So really fascinating. And in fact, just before this recording, we were talking about helminthic infections that I certainly don't see here in Texas, but are common in the rural South American population. So super cool to be able to, propagate that type of information in different media, but we have to be cognizant of where people are. They're not all just in one place. They're still heterogeneous geographically and on the internet. Super cool. Let's get some quantitative numbers behind it, Francisco. Could you talk about some numbers to give our listeners a sense of like what is the reach of some of these publications?
Of course. So by the end of our year term, we reached a total of 62,447 views, 562 likes, 276 reposts, and 48 comments with 32 bookmarks. Our top performing post was a tutorial posted by our colleague Roberta Catania on sex differences in aging related myocardial stiffening quantitatively measured with MR elastography, which was authored by Iranian collaborators. And that single post reached 8,863 views and generated 32 likes, 14 reposts, one comment, and three bookmarks. And this is where I think it gets interesting. We are niche. So, a very highly specialized field like cardiothoracic imaging. I think these numbers speak for themselves and they show how social media can significantly expand the visibility. That's the main word, visibility of the research and connect with it with the broader medical community.
Well said, Francisco. There's scientists across the world that provide such great insight into these novel frontiers in cardiothoracic imaging, but many, particularly of our youngest listeners and scientists, aren't often contacting science via primary literature. So getting the visibility out there through media that we use on a day-to-day basis for non-scientific pursuits is so key. Second comment on that is you mentioned Roberta's post, which had a little less than 9,000 views, but in totality, we're talking 60,000 views across all of the posts. So we're not all concentrated in a single post. There's a multitude of very high impact posts that you and the team have made over a period of time. It's a testament to the hard work that's gone into this, and will clearly continue to reap benefits for not only you and the team, but also those that are publishing in the journal.
Exactly. And I think these are the numbers, it's like the evidence to back it up with, but we see it all the time. As we're going through our afternoon scroll, we know which papers are becoming viral. We know when guidelines, like multi-specialty consensus, are posted and everyone is talking about them. And you may not be part of the conversation if you're not that close to social media as your other colleagues. So there's room there.
Yeah, I wanted to get your perspective on that real quick to take a tangent on virality. So, virality is it's a well-known concept in non-professional social media. Certain videos, certain posts will achieve hundreds of thousands, millions of views, despite originating from some relatively small source. I have seen this absolutely be the case in the cardiothoracic imaging space too. Just wanted to get your take on the perspective on this and how social media helps us, quote unquote, keep up with the literature in the modern era.
Exactly. So I believe that virality is very difficult to define. I wouldn't be able to do that. I mean, I'm sure there's professional, dedicated communication skill strategists or so that may give a more exact definition. But we do see from time to time when a paper becomes extremely visible. I think there's three main things there. One is the topic. So hot topics, ILD, multi-specialty consensus, new consensus on valve imaging through CT. So not only consensus, but things we are unsure of, difficult cases, changes in management. So those things are the hot topics that become very visible very fast. And then there's also timing. So when summer comes, almost no virality. But when it's meeting season, and we know our meeting seasons, we know when cardiology is having their European seasons, or in by the end of the year in every RSNA meeting, those are times when things become viral again. So that's a thing I would be aware of.
Fascinating. Yeah, really cool. So I never thought about the time of the year and its association with major events being a precipitant to things going viral because, we are all just paying a little more attention when ESC or RSNA or an ASCII are going on. So yeah, interesting. And I'm sure it has an impact on how much the readership ends up getting to that initial publication, the expert consensus document or major trial or whatever it may be. Let's now move to the mutual benefit that we were kind of talking about before. Social media exposure that our authors get is not just for the authors, too. Our journals are also getting some exposure with social media posts. Could you talk about the potential mutual benefit to authors and journals with having a social media presence like this?
Of course. So I think this applies to authors, researchers, and editors overall. And the main thing here is that traditionally we have focused on the H index as a measure of productivity and citation impact over time. And this is still very relevant, but it takes time, years to build, right? And there are other emerging metrics, like, for example, alt metrics, which are increasingly relevant. In this specific case of Altmetrics, it tracks online attention from academic and mainstream sources, including Twitter, LinkedIn, news outlets, blogs, or policy documents. So this provides like a more dynamic and near real-time indicator of how this research and usage publication is being shared and discussed online. And again, in this very specific niche of cardiothoracic imaging, this can rapidly increase the altmetric scores, and eventually, what it translates to is this research having more visibility, and eventually might translate into higher H indexes and things like that. Yeah.
Yeah, great points. Obviously, our authors for the publications in the journal spend tremendous amounts of effort to curate we can call it content that they submit to the journal for publication. But there's a ton of structured and unstructured efforts from you, the team, and many others to create posts beyond the content published in the journal, but the social media posts that you're describing. And this clearly has an impact not only on the authors, but also the editorial board, who has a vested interest, the increased viewership slash listenership of their content. So
Exactly. We see this happening across journals. We're talking about our experience, but other journals are doing that as well. So I think this this is recognized by the whole academic community. So it's important to be aware of that.
metrics tend to always come into conversations about the editorial board future of any journal, including radiology, cardiothoracic imaging. But of course, we as imagers have benefits from social media beyond that of just, increasing listenership slash viewership of articles, increasing our alt metrics for our papers. Could you speak to some of those more intangible benefits to the use of social media in cardiothoracic imaging?
Of course. So I'm gonna delve a little bit into my personal experience here, if I'm allowed. So, in terms of networking, for example, that's a big one. I've been able to collaborate on publications with colleagues from the US, Turkey, India, Brazil, all while based in Colombia. So, I think that networking through social media does remove the geographic barrier and makes these connections possible. Not only academically or professionally, we eventually become friends over time, and we share troubles or our questions and everything that we're going through. As this is a little bit specific to the in training editorial board, but I think it goes a deeper way across every step of the ladder, I guess. When it comes to opportunities, for example, many of my roles have come through positions that are advertised online. For instance, I was involved with radiographics and later joined radiology cardiothoracic imaging as an early career editorial board member. thanks to the social media promotion. So I remember very clearly, I went to RSNA one year and I knew that they were hosting the like an informative session of the RCTI editorial board, and I attended to that. And then they said, "Well, openings are due next spring, so you have to stay tuned to social media to know when this opens and apply." And then not only academically, but also it's important to know that many job offerings are posted online as well. And then there's access to events, right? So as we've commented, this very specific topic that we cover in cardiothoracic imaging is a global one. So RCTI is part of the RSNA Journal Suite, which has a strong global print, but is based in North America. But we know that there are multiple subspecialty associations that hold meetings across the globe, and attending all of these in person would be impossible. Social media, I believe it makes it a little bit easier to follow them virtually, stay informed, and even participate in discussions. And then there's also the potential for knowledge dissemination, which I feel it's very strong here because social media can connect professionals across the globe, regardless of a country's income tier, helping reach underserved contexts where traditional access to conferences and journals might be limited. So that's what I would say. It's a little bit less tangible, but it's there and it's big.
Francisco, we've been focusing mostly on the positives of social media and its relationship with cardiothoracic imaging. But as many experience outside of the professional world, and perhaps in the professional world too, there are downsides and potential ethical issues to the use of social media or just the practices of social media organizations altogether. Could I get your quick comments on that, how you feel about it, and how it relates to our field, cardiothoracic imaging?
Course, as in everything that we do, I think there are ethical considerations, of course. And this may have become a little bit more important just recently in the recent years. We have turned more attention to that. One very important one is that many social media platforms are private enterprises, which are driven by commercial and sometimes political interests. And this can create echo chambers that influence which content gets amplified or suppressed, and that's something that we should all be aware of, regardless of the use that we give to it. Another risk is in that we have in imaging, in cardiothoracic imaging as well, is patient privacy. So we often want to share compelling cases to educate or spark discussion, but imaging studies may contain identifiers, and this is a must that they must be removed. And then everyone should be aware of the legal frameworks in their country and their institution specific policies as we engage into global conversations. But everyone should be aware of that, for example, these policies may be very different from the ones that apply to the colleague that we are interacting with on the other side of the screen, right? And then there's also growing awareness of the environmental footprint of digital content consumption. That includes the energy and resource demands of web use, streaming, and social media. And although this is a broader societal issue, it's worth acknowledging that our online activities are also part of this larger picture.
The editorial board for many journals, including that of radiology cardiothoracic imaging, have a very strict set of procedures and do a lot of hard work to determine which of the submissions to the journal end up meeting the viewer's eyes, getting published in our journal. They also do a tremendous amount of work to determine what sort of revisions are needed to help really highlight, amplify, or correct scientific methodology that may be out there. However, once it's out there, once it's published, we almost have this second public editorial board that determines which articles, which posts, which op-eds get amplified and which ones do not. So akin to what you're describing with the social media algorithms. And yeah, there's positives to that, but there's also some serious negatives in that it may create those spheres of influence that don't necessarily allow for open, objective scientific discussion. Really interesting point, and not always are we cognizant of that when just scrolling through in the evening trying to see our various professional and non-professional posts out there. So great insight for those of us out there that may not necessarily pay much regard to that. The content is curated in multiple ways, professionally by the editorial boards and perhaps unprofessionally and maybe in a detrimental fashion by the general public. So yeah, great ideas, Francisco. Before we close, I do want to ask you a quick question just for advice for those of us out there that have minimal dabblings in social media. For scientists, for editorial board members, for those who are just casual listeners, is there anything that you would suggest in terms of their interaction with social media to help achieve things that we were just discussing, increasing viewership of science, increasing networking opportunities, or just learning about things across the cardiothoracic imaging space?
Of course, Praveen. So, yeah, I mean, I think that overall, the main message here that I want to share is to think as social media as an extension of our communication skills and our professional presence in cardiothoracic imaging. It is a very good idea to start small and be intentional. That this means that everything that we post should add value, whether it's sharing our own work, highlighting a colleague's research, or explaining a key concept. There's also the fact of consistency here. We have to use high quality visuals. Remember that engagement goes both ways. That is a very good one. So we have to respond to comments, join discussion, disagree. That's a very good thing to be aware of, and build relationships. Like over time, this approach not only increases the visibility of our work, but also strengthens our whole cardiothoracic imaging community. And just a final thought, very important one. So, with all that's been said, it's also very important to highlight that using social media as a communication tool is an option, right? Not an obligation. And this should always be aligned with our own preferences, our comfort level, and overall, like, our professional objectives.
Francisco, great comments, great concluding thoughts, and really thank you for the expertise that you brought on. This is a relatively novel area of science that is becoming increasingly more important over the past decade and a half. And your insight into this is obviously evident through your experience in the science, your publications themselves, but the ability with which you're able to command the conversation here is really demonstrative of the time and effort you put into learning about this space. We really appreciate those of us that are novices in the social media world, but are trying to learn more cardiothoracic imaging, quite frankly. So thanks a bunch for coming onto the podcast. Thanks for sharing the expertise. And thank you for your contributions to the editorial board, to the journal, and to the science altogether.
Thank you as well. And thank to everyone that has also contributed to all of the social media efforts that we do. And obviously, thank you to all of the authors that make the very interesting and high achieving science that we share.
Absolutely. Thanks again, Francisco. Thank you, as you said, to all the contributors out there. To our listeners, of course, thank you for tuning in. We really, really appreciate y'all's feedback on the podcast and the journal itself. We want to curate great science and content for you to help continue this objective approach towards understanding cardiothoracic imaging. Once again, this is the Radiology Cardiothoracic Imaging Journal podcast, and we will see you next time.